Marketing as an SME. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. More and more small and medium-sized enterprises are coming to China in search of enormous opportunities in this fast-moving market. But they also face the risk of failure for failing to do proper homework, abide by local laws, understand cultural sensitivities and regional differences, and adapt Western products and services for local consumers. This week on Thoughtful China, our experts, Wesley Xu, Kunal Sinhal, and Chris Wingo, will share their knowledge about what SMEs should do to successfully build brands in this market. And Scott Williams, VP of Programs and Services and the person overseeing the Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Center at the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, will share a thought or two about growing competition from local brands. But first, with us is Chris Gibson, VP of China Development at iPie Auction Company. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Trevor.
First, let us understand what iPie does.
iPie Auction was the first foreign auction company to get an auction license in China. And what we offer is to the Chinese consumer goods through the auction platform. So an exciting new way for Chinese consumers to buy luxury product. So we work directly with manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors, and sell their overstock and unwanted inventory, last year's models, directly to the Chinese consumer.
So your market entry service provides an interesting way for foreign companies to explore the China market. What are three major challenges that American companies face when trying to enter the Chinese market?
Well, a market entry program helps SMEs. So the unique challenges for them, of course, is understanding the Chinese market. Also understanding if their product is suitable for the Chinese market, how it would fit in with their competition. So we help them really try to get some initial data before making a decision whether to enter the Chinese market.
And can you give examples of how you help them get that data?
Yeah, currently we're working with a coffee company who has a unique brand. They use a product of high-strength caffeine, and they're trying to figure out if that's a good market for China. Is it a good product for the Chinese market? So what we've helped them with is getting consumers to try the product, buy product at our auction to set a price, look at the packaging and the style of the product, and decide if it's something they really would use in the future. Then we can go back to that coffee company with some real data and say, this is what we found out. You may want to change your packaging, your name, the style of the product, and even tweak the product a little bit to make it more suitable for the Chinese consumer.
So that's actually a very hands-on approach. How are you finding and really talking and coaching to the Chinese side of things? Because that's very important. That's where you're gathering the insights.
Well, at our auction, the product is sold directly to the consumer. So they set the price during auction. And then we will go back to them with some market research questions and focus groups and ask them specific questions about the product, the flavor, in the fact of this coffee, the flavor, the packaging, etc., the name. And then we can go right back to the manufacturer and say, this is exactly what we found out about your product.
So Alibaba's recent IPO obviously has been driven in large part to the huge rise in e-commerce here in China. Have you seen significant changes in Chinese consumer behaviors in terms of their brand awareness and their decision making?
Absolutely. I think e-commerce is going to be, it's growing so quickly and the market's changing so rapidly. We're actually going to start doing auctions online in the summer of this year, which we haven't done before. Our auctions are typically live and simulcast auctions. So we are going to do an e-commerce platform. What I've noticed, which has been interesting, initially we were doing really just brands and recognizable brands, but now we're introducing new product that people haven't been able to buy in China before through our market entry or working with smaller SMEs and retailers. And so we've been able to offer them product that is unique and new, and Chinese consumers are responding to that.
Now, on the one hand, the sort of intimate one-on-one approach and direct-to-consumer approach is a great way to gather insights. On the other hand, for a lot of SMEs, it is a very slow and time-consuming process. Are there ways to scale that up so that they can actually grow the business larger in China?
I think an SME just has to really work with good partners and find out and do really good research. So using resources that are here in China with SMEs, speaking to other SMEs who've entered the market, really trying to get an understanding of where your product or your service fits in the marketplace. It is a very difficult market just to enter and feel you're going to have immediate success if you're not going to do that research. So I feel what we did and what I feel a lot of SMEs really need to do is do their due diligence, work with really good partners, and take advice of people who've been here a while before entering the market.
And for the life cycle of an SME in China, do you see iPie as being really a partner at the beginning of the life cycle, or do you, once they've grabbed the foothold and built their brand a bit, do you see them sort of naturally moving on to larger retail platforms and perhaps actually bricks and mortar?
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, the idea of the market entry program is really to give people those data points. So the example of the coffee company I gave earlier, what I'd love for them to do is then meet with a distributor in China and be able to distribute their product throughout China. If they want to use us as a sales platform, maybe it's a watch or a handbag or fashion item, we can certainly do that. But the main focus of the market entry program is to give people an insight into their market in China and help them grow.
Chris, thanks for being on Thoughtful China.
My pleasure, thank you.
Let's take a break to hear from our sponsor. And then AmCham Shanghai's Scott Williams will share a thought or two about rising competition from Chinese firms.
Shanghai is at the forefront of China's rapid shift from the world's so-called factory to an economy driven by the service sector. At AmCham Shanghai, we have picked up on some common trends in the marketplace that indicate more and more companies are in China for China. That is to say that fewer companies are purely coming to China to take advantage of the manufacturing prowess and relatively lower cost, but more are producing and marketing their goods and services to the local market. As part of this change, we have also noticed trends showing that GDP growth is slowing back to single digits for the first time since the late 70s. However, overall profitability is spreading across all sectors. In other words, more companies than ever before are reporting that they are profitable. Another indicator of China's maturing economy is the increased competition, not just from international actors in the marketplace, but more and more from local Chinese companies, which have become ever more competitive. Facing the changing reality of the China market, many companies are tackling issues related to key operational inefficiencies, operational areas to be more streamlined, more compliant, and ultimately more competitive. Following the mantra of in China for China, more and more companies are investing more resources to develop innovative strategies to reach out into what is the growing Chinese consumer marketplace. We have also picked up on competitive de-emphasizing the primacy of the Chinese growth engine in their operations. In recognition of the slowdown in sheer GDP growth, many companies have strived to deepen their level of integration between their China business operations with those of their global operations.
Thanks, Scott. Our panel experts today are Wesley Xu, Chairman of the Board at Westmax; Kunal Sinha, Regional Cultural Insights Director, Asia Pacific at Ogilvy and Mather; and Chris Wingo, Founder and Managing Director at China Sage Consultants. Wesley and Chris, welcome to Thoughtful China. And Kunal, good to see you again.
Good to be back.
Thank you for inviting us. Yes.
So Scott just mentioned that companies should do their homework before coming to China and setting up shop. What kind of due diligence do you think they have to do here that perhaps differs from what they would have to do in the US?
One of the biggest things that I think they need to validate up front is the value of their product offering to the Chinese customer. So many times companies come to China predicated on the fact that they've got a good business in the US and Europe, and they've got a concept or a model of how things will go in China. But when they get here, they find that they have trouble and that it's really difficult. They have trouble selling, and that the Chinese customers just don't accept their value proposition. Chinese buy and do things for reasons very differently than we might imagine in the US or other places. So validating the value of their product to the Chinese customer is extremely important.
That's a great point, but if I'm an SME in the US, how do I find out?
I think the very important thing for us to understand is really to understand the operating environment in China. I don't know if you have noticed or not that many of the internet-based companies perhaps from the United States, very rarely do you see them actually being successful in China.
Sure, we've seen Groupon,
and
not very
eBay
successful here.
Even the Yahoo eventually converged with Alibaba and so forth. I think one of the important things is not being able to be grounded, very deeply rooted in China, understanding the culture, the grassroots nature of the Chinese consumer, and so not knowing the operating condition inside of China itself is is something that we need to be very conscious about.
So what you're saying is that the problem is not unique to SMEs. It could actually be huge global corporations that run into the same issues.
Exactly.
So the common learning is that they need to have a team on the ground that understands the market, perhaps even before they start to make big investments and set up their branch offices here.
Absolutely. That when the multinationals came in and still come in, they've got a lot of money to put behind the problem. So many of them have struggled, if you look back in history, struggled for years to build up profitability. SMEs can't afford to do that, so they've got to be smarter. They need to do some of their homework up front and make sure, again, that they understand the operating environment and that their product has value in China. Most products that are produced, say, in the United States by SME type companies, probably, I'm going to go by a gut estimate, 80% do not have value in China. It's a very competitive marketplace. Many companies in the US, small companies, think, well, we've got this great business, great product. What they don't realize is there are maybe 1,000 Chinese companies making products similar, competitive products. They may not be as good, they may not last as long, but they're a lot cheaper.
Hey, Kunal, how do you help clients that are looking to break into the market here? How do you deliver and educate them about the cultural insights here?
Well, I think, the first thing is, as they've been saying, is to really look at what, say, Chinese businesses are looking at in their American partners and vice versa. And we found important cultural differences. I mean, for example, when you're looking at Chinese businesses, whether they're big businesses that expect supplies from American or European SMEs or small businesses, they're looking for innovation. They're looking for new kinds of technology and service models which can then be made appropriate for the China market. On the other hand, when you're looking at what American companies, and again, American SMEs, who are looking at China for sourcing their products, and I think that's also an important part, because it's not big companies that are sourcing the product, but an American importer who sources goods from China. I would consider them as a market opportunity as well, or define them within SMEs. They're looking for completely different things. They're looking for low price, and they're looking for dependability, which is, my supplies will be right. I can rely on them over a period of time. I'm not going to be cheated. The factory that I've been told actually exists on the ground, and which is why the on-the-ground presence that Wesley is talking about is absolutely essential. So there are those important cultural differences, and you need to understand that.
What about what Chris mentioned, the customers here? The Chinese customers, maybe they don't need your product here because they have 10 other Chinese alternatives that already work well for them. Or maybe they do need your product because you're different from the 10 existing Chinese alternatives here. Do you look at that, and do you consider that as a core part of your business?
Of course. I mean, market segmentation is very important, and it applies not just to a US-China relationship, but anywhere. And if you look at, say, the automotive industry, of course, there is a certain set of consumers in China which only wants to buy foreign brands. Local brands don't even enter their consideration set. Similarly, in the luxury market, the reason why foreign brands have been successful in China and local brands have not, because there's a sort of a huge gap between the brand value, the flash value, and even the craftsmanship of those products. And there's a market for products that are at the top end of the spectrum. So it's important to get that segmentation right, even for SMEs as much as it is for the big companies.
Yeah, this is a very important point, especially when you're looking at China. I often say China is one big country with many nations, and especially if you looking at from the perspective of sales and marketing. If you choose to operating, for example, in places like Shanghai and Beijing, you're not only just facing the local competition, you're facing the global 500. And all of those companies are also here in Beijing and Shanghai. But if you choose to go to tier 2 or tier 3 cities, and the competition landscape is very, very different. You're dealing with a lot of local elements out there. Perhaps you can afford to make a few more mistakes, but not necessarily, but in Shanghai and Beijing. So I think from the angle of market entry, where you actually choose to be your first gateway, is also something to be considered with.
The other key point we need to make is there are consumer products, and then there are the industrial B2B type products. I deal mainly in the B2B realm in our business, and so what I'm referring to in some of my comments was mainly B2B. If you're Apple iPhone and you're 4 times as much as a similar Chinese product, you still can have a pretty good business. In the industrial realm, it's a little bit different. Decisions are made differently.
Yeah, and another important point is the nature of the SME is a flexibility and a speed. Let's not forget that. You are not multinational. You don't have 5,000 employees with headquarters and keep looking after your back. So when you come to China, first of all, you have to be grounded. You really have to think of this as a one-way ticket. You're not really returning back next year. And secondly, when you're looking at the flexibility and the speed, improvise. Don't forget that. For example, people know the history of Alibaba when they created Taobao. It was dated back in 2002, and they sent a team of 6 or 7 people into the villa house, and the Ma Yun owns. It's actually essentially a clean room process, and so they did the groundwork and get a Taobao launched. But what really got Taobao launched was in 2003. So what happened in 2003? It was SARS, if you recall. And during that time, the entire city-level commercial activity ceased to exist. And the thriving internet e-commerce, it was really beginning from that time point forward. Similarly, I mean, I can just even speaking from my own business, and we provide private network for small, medium business and also for multinational. Back in March and April of this year, the undersea cable in between Shanghai and connecting to Taiwan and Japan, they were cut by the fishing boats. And so there were 2 out of 5 main cables were cut, and all of a sudden internet traffic is just completely chaotic. And we get tons of calls, and all of a sudden trying to get access to Salesforce.com, to Amazon Web Services and so forth, and get server activated in Japan and US. You improvise, and very quickly you're trying to see what you can do to capture the market in a moment of time when you're more ready. For things like that, it's something to think about. Again, using the strengths of SME flexibility and speed is very, very important.
That ability to adapt to these sudden changes.
Exactly.
And take advantage of these opportunities where consumer behavior or business behavior is all of a sudden shifted very dramatically.
Exactly.
So you think that's one of the key advantages of SMEs here. But let me ask, what are some things that small and medium businesses can do here in terms of marketing on an ongoing basis? Because you're talking about sort of special events or perhaps once in a lifetime type of opportunities in the case of like an Alibaba and Taobao. But what are some things that small and medium-sized businesses can do on a regular basis to market their companies and their services and still be effective in such a competitive market?
I think, at least in the industrial realm or business-to-business realm, one of the key things that they need to do in the beginning is go out and establish what we'll call a strategic case history. So they need to find those high-profile companies that are willing. It may take a lot of work to sell it, but willing to use the product that they're bringing to the table, employ it, make sure it works, provide good service, make them a happy customer, so that they can leverage off that application, off that customer into other customers. As you know, the networks, the social networks, the personal networks, the business networks in China are very tight. And so what happens here within an industry at this company spreads very quickly among colleagues, with their former classmates that work in another company. So that word of mouth gets out. Plus, the company itself can take that information that they've got from that case history and spread that around. And so it allows them to get into other applications. Chinese companies, when you approach them, the first thing they ask you is, well, who else in China is using my product? The Chinese have a saying that you don't want to be the first person to eat crab or eat a crab. So if you can imagine, nobody wants to take that chance. There's a fear of failure. So if you can establish early on with strategic customers applications that are successful, that will help, and it does spread the word through the marketplace.
Well, I think, again, with some of the research that's available, including some research, I think, which is done by AmCham itself, you realize that most SMEs in China, whether they're local SMEs or foreign SMEs, just about do two things: participate in trade fairs and have an Alibaba presence. That's it. And many of them don't even think anything else is necessary. So in terms of real marketing and real brand building, they're doing very little. And we know that the opportunities are far greater. So if Chris is talking about creating case studies, those stories can be packaged, they can be told, you can use the satisfied customers as spokespersons and create, referral programs, for example, and gain market share. SMEs can come together under associations, and we know, for example, within China, you have a towel manufacturers association and a USB thumb drive manufacturers association. Now, they don't do anything apart from socializing right now, or lobbying with the government when there is a sudden policy which might affect their business. They do very little of marketing activity. And I think SMEs need to use the power of those existing networks or those associations and start creating relationships with customers. The same thing applies for American SMEs that are coming in.
Well, and speaking of AmCham's research, AmCham Shanghai just published a report in China Business Report talking about the growth of the services industry and how that accounts for more than 60% now of Shanghai's gross domestic product. So does that mean that you see this sector really taking over and associations perhaps coming together and forming to help make sure that us moving from China's factory-based production and image to a more services-based and more IP-based and innovation-based economy?
Absolutely. So I think the first implication for SMEs, and whether they're American SMEs or Chinese SMEs, is the talent crisis. Yeah, because when you're manufacturing, when you're making the machines that will manufacture the products,
talent is not that big of an issue.
Sure, yeah. But when you're in the services industry, talent is a huge, huge issue. And if that is the opportunity, the SMEs and bigger businesses need to just very quickly ramp up their talent. Which means investments in training, which I see a big opportunity for foreign businesses to come in. And because there is a certain kind of skills that are required, how do you train up the staff here in order to meet that business? There's training in Chinese business culture, which is again going to be very important in the services industry, in customer service, and that customer service is not just face-to-face, but online customer service. All of those will be very, very important.
Great. Wesley, Kunal, Chris, thanks for being on Thoughtful China.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Youku, Tudo, and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo, WeChat, and Twitter, and join our LinkedIn group. See you again.